I guess we should probably get this started. First of all, thanks for everyone to coming out to hear what some guy rambling about a raccoon cartoon game. This is Visualizing Sly Cooper. My name is Dev Madan. I'm the art director with Sucker Punch Productions. A little bit about myself. I started back in the games industry in 1990, working for the 8-bit Nintendo, which I generally equate to drawing with light brights. Pretty much worked there for a little while, and the company ended up closing just after they got started, really. And at that point, I ended up spending some time freelancing, or unemployed, as my friends would say, and just working as a freelance illustrator, trying to break into comic books, and eventually returned to games and started as a art director for a children's company called Humongous Entertainment, where my responsibilities there were character design, backgrounds, animation, setting the visual style for the family of games. After a few years there, I ended up returning to a comic book career where I worked with a variety of publishers, Marvel, Image, but primarily with DC Comics, where I broke in and started working on a number of titles, specifically Batman Adventures, Plastic Man, some Judge Dredd, and eventually my own series called Young Heroes in Love. That ran for about 4 or 5 years, and towards the end of my series, Young Heroes, I decided I wanted a real job again, because working in comics was a dream come true, but it was also my worst nightmare. It was, living with these characters 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I thought going back into games, I would actually get a real job and work 40 hours a week. After joining Sucker Punch, we shipped our first product called Rocket Robot on Wheels in late '99. And upon finishing that, we knew we were going to produce another character-based action game. We were actually hoping to be a lot more ambitious with it. At the time, the PlayStation 2 transition was coming, and that's where we wanted to be. But more importantly, we definitely wanted to work on a character with limbs. As you can see, Rocket there has no limbs, and it was basically to compensate for the fact that we had like 5 people working on this game. So we ended up signing with Sony as a first-party developer, and in September of 2002, we released Sly Cooper for the PS2. All right. So basically, today I'm going to give an overview, talking about the aesthetics of Sly Cooper. Primarily, I will start with the design of the character, building his personality, the visual look of the game, the art pipeline of the game, incorporating these elements together to make a story, to tell a story. So let's start with designing the character. Sly started basically as a brainstorming joke between the producer, the director of development, and I after Rocket. First of all, we knew we wanted to do a thiefy kind of game, and ultimately what ended up cracking us up was the idea of a raccoon putting on a mask, getting ready to go on a heist. So as you can see, the black and white in the top left corner is literally what we pitched Sony. And so we went through a variety of iterations with Sly. Immediately, I started thinking about characters I could draw on for him, what his look would be. Obviously, going into a thief game, a nocturnal game, a game that takes place at night, a raccoon was sort of a, I don't want to say obvious choice, but it was definitely what came to mind. Because of, already you kind of had the tail and the mask as like these iconic elements that you could draw from. In doing all of these sketches, the people that started coming to mind were Hogan from Hogan's Heroes was really where the beginning of him started, and that's really where the hat came from. We ended up giving him a cane just because it's sort of, in my mind anyways, it added a sense of class to him when he'd walk into a room, and we ended up calling it the Universal Thief Tool, which is essentially just something to smash with. So we went through a variety of names, character looks, who is this guy, basically, a real searching of personalities and shapes. Japan really got involved with us fairly early on. They really helped to share ideas with us. Because we'd never designed because we'd never designed a character for a worldwide release, we needed to actually make this character work in all 3 territories, which was something that we had never done before, and it was really nothing that we'd ever even thought about. We just figured it would just be like, we just draw a cartoon, put it up, and send it out the door, and it's good to go. But as it turns out, there are definitely things that need to be addressed in various markets. I think it was actually in the description for this talk. It was, Europe wants them dark and edgy, Japan wants them cute, and America wants them cool. Get started. And we wanted to avoid swapping out the character models, because up until then, any game that had been shipped to the 3 territories, the models and the geometry were tweaked to fit their respective markets. And we were hoping to avoid that going into this. So, as I said, Japan came in, they were super helpful, we had a ton of great ideas. As you can see, there was a variety of looks with Sly. He went everywhere from Jim Carrey to James Bond, and this was about a 7-month process. But through it all, we really wanted to make sure we focused on the 3 iconic elements for Sly, which was the cane, the mask, and the tail. We actually even had a bunch of drawings that we had kids come in, take a look at some really ugly early builds of Sly, and we asked them to draw what they thought Sly Cooper looked like. And every one of them, we knew we were in the right direction when it literally was like a stick man with a mask, a cane, and this raccoon tail. So we knew we were hopefully getting those elements across. So let's see. I have once we had him done, we actually built out the rest of his characters. You can see that's pretty early Carmelita Fox, who was at the time known as Chase, and 2 other characters that didn't quite make the final game. And we started working towards getting him running and working in 3D. And obviously, as I'm sure all of you know, what looks good on paper doesn't necessarily always translate to what you see on screen. So obviously, proportion shifts had to be made, tweaks here and there, as well as the constraints of having to make them work in engine. And I don't know if this is going to work, because yeah, here we go. Here we have a really early build of Sly. As you can see, he needs a little bit of help. We went through, oh man, I don't remember how many ranges of this, of trying to animate the tail to look good. That was, seeing as that was one of our iconic elements, we really wanted to make sure the tail looked and felt good. And again, as you can see there, after spending 7 months of working on this character, first thing we do is drop him in the world, and he's like this, So we needed to make sure that his personality came across through his tail. So, and we have a second rev here, where I believe, yeah, the tail, as you can see, is a little bit smoother, but still not all the way there yet. Still, Sly looks like a mailman. We call them the mailman days. And what we finally decided to do was to sit down and the importance of pencil and paper. To work on Sly was a really complex thing to do, because essentially at any given time you'd have an animator working on the actual animation of the guy, then you'd have like the concept artist, and then the programmer, and then the designer who needed to get to finagle the environment for Sly that he was running around in. So as you can see, it was just like a lot of people in the kitchen. So by having this pencil on paper, it really allowed everybody to focus on what Sly needed to do, what he needed to feel like as he was going through his motions. And at the same time, it really was something that helped drive home the iconic sense that we needed to get out of Sly. So I think that's, yeah, just a couple more of these. And then this is a build of Sly just before the version that was shipped. He was still feeling a little clunky. excuse me, the tail has been had been streamlined, and of course, with every process, we'd go through and we'd remap the whole thing. I mean, it was just this whole thing of starting over and over and over again. Next. So once we had the character that we felt moved like we wanted him to and reacted and had the moves, the challenge now was, how do you sell his personality when you spend 75% of the time looking at his behind? The obvious things that I think I mentioned earlier was the tail would flick to show like he was active and like sort of twitchy and looking around and engaged in his environment. As well as his eyebrows. We tried to use those as his ears, to use them as eyebrows, to just show that he was sort of skittish and aware. But those are really the first things that you could do. But we really needed to tell you that he was a cool guy. First lesson we learned is cool is a relative term. Different people think cool is a different, So again, as I mentioned, it was a lot of people that would have to touch this model, and so I think I showed you that, the animation poses. So selling his personality. Enter Bentley and Murray. Bentley is your pal, who is basically your brains of your operation. He's Q meets MacGyver. He's basically sitting in the van, helping you work out the plan. But never wanting to leave because he's afraid. Essentially, he's our talking handbook. He's basically the communication with Sly through a thing called the Binocucom, which makes you, we force you to look at certain places we want you to go, tell you how to operate your moves, and show you what we want you to see to lead you through these levels. Next up is Murray. And Murray is pretty much your innocent burden. He really wants to be Sly in every single way. He wants to get out there and be a part of the team. And because of his vulnerability, it forces you to care for him. And again, through the conversations you have with Bentley, you have a banter that goes back and forth to where the characters feel like they have a sense of history together, which really helps sell his personalities. Again, once we drop Sly into the environment, him running around, climb pipes and all of the stuff that he was doing, you really didn't get a sense of who he was. And the point I'm trying to make is that it was through those two characters they would build him up so that it would convince the player of what Sly's role was as he was out in the environment as a daredevil on the team. Next. And Murray was basically based off of Philip Seymour Hoffman from Boogie Nights. So that's why he's the wheelman. Let's see, next up. Carmelita Fox. Carmelita. She was inspired, I think, as I've mentioned before, by J-Lo from Out of Sight. The idea here is you're running around these bosses' place, these bosses' hideaways. You really didn't feel like a thief. I mean, we were sort of telling you were a thief. Her entire job was to run around after you, shaking her fist, telling you that you're a thief. And as well, it was also just good for gameplay because every time she'd show up, there would be a chase sequence. Here we are at the opening shot from Paris. And this is pretty much her entire job through the entire game is say, stop thief and shoot a laser at you. Her job is to bring him to justice, track him down. Sly, of course, is always one step ahead of her, leaving her holding the bag. And we were hoping that would sort of add some tension to the game, as well as in the last level there was an uneasy alliance where you had to help her out and she had to help you out. That was just an interesting narrative. So, having said that, with Carmelita emphasizing you as a thief, Murray and Bentley basically relying on you as their team captain, hopefully you were convinced of this Robin Hood kind of vibe and reinforced Sly's character. Look. So from the beginning, we definitely wanted to know that we wanted the player to feel like they were playing a cartoon. And the inspiration came from comic books, Warner Brother cartoons, animated movies, other games, everything. So the first thing that we did was produced a couple of production paintings which really sort of showed the principal direction we wanted to go in terms of how you make a game that takes place at night interesting. So the solution was through just controlled lighting, pools of light, which we wanted to use to help you guide you through your environments and get a nice sense of depth through it. So as you can see here, we actually had the two principles of the warm areas where you would interact with as Sly, and then the cooler areas that we would hopefully send you to through pockets of light. And then this would be an exterior. We really wanted it to feel like a hand-painted background. I think that was we went through a lot of trouble trying to emulate that. We did everything from like make it out of Sculpey and scan it to actual little tiny paintings of textures, just try and get the stylized feel of the world. Let's see. So here we have Sly at night. The other thing too is we wanted to make sure that with this game, when you were dropped in, it was pretty much I can't remember, I think it's called the 20-minute movie rule. Inside the first 20 minutes of any movie, you know who the characters are, what the situations are, what this character has to do, where he has to go, and just totally set you up for basically Act 2. I'll sort of come back to that in a second. But again, the immediate challenge is we're trying to get these characters to pop off the background, and again, inside of a game that happened at night. So obviously, as you can see, putting the cell borders around Sly really helped pop him off the background, as well as control our lighting. And I think okay. So in any given screenshot, the further away we went back from the camera, the more realistic the textures and environment became. So as an example, the UI is obviously the most graphic element of it. Then would be Sly or Bentley or Murray, the main character. The collectible, the NPC, the interactive geometry that Sly runs around on, and then the sideshow type stuff, the non-interactive geometry, then the sideshow, which is somewhere you can't get to, finally the background sky drop or painting. Here's an example of it, is like you see Sly, bad crop I might add, but the UI, the 33, Sly there and directly in front of a bottle. And then further on down the way, the interactive geometry that you're going to be traversing all the way to the backdrops of the mesas and such that you never really get to. Let's see. All right, so using color. Basically, all of the environments were treated as characters. Early on, we went through and created palettes for all the bosses in the game, which actually had to work, which were directly related to the bosses so that they felt like they belonged in this environment. By doing that, it actually sort of helped make the player feel like they were going through an adventure, seeing what really amounted to be sort of the same game experience. Really, you're running through tubes and jumping, but at least feel like a different place. I keep losing my place. So let's see, we'll go to base off the colors. So by playing with the colors and the hues, we got a sense of depth, and as well as that, with the pools of light, as I was mentioning, it helped guide the player through the environment. This being the door of Carmelita's office from the very first level of the game. Let's see. So we'll get into the environments. Oh, actually, here's a couple of examples of using color. So here's Sly in the very first level of the game. You can see we're trying to direct you to different parts of this environment through little pools of light, which, again, not only enhance where we want you to be going, but a sense of depth as well. And this, I believe, is Carmelita chasing Sly. You'll see all of the colors in the foreground are warm, where Sly is supposed to be, and all the areas where you're not supposed to be is like these cool blues that are recessed in the backdrop, so that again, creating an illusion of depth. So, the environments. Their primary function, tell you why are you there, where are you, where are you supposed to go, what the player was supposed to do next. Basically, all of these things needed to be answered really early on in the levels, because once we got you going, it was just about getting to the end. The needs of an environment. Basically, this is building to a reveal. Basically taken from, I believe it's like church architecture. When you walk into a church or any major building, it'll always sort of put you in through a small enclosed area to a big reveal. And it just sort of makes the space that you walk into feel that much more important and that much more bigger, because it's I don't know how to describe it, a perspective thing. So throughout the game, wherever possible, we try to maintain these thicks and thins by getting you going through tight spaces and then out into big open areas, and then varying that, as well as your pathways, keeping those varied so that you weren't feeling like you're running through a bunch of shoe boxes. So pretty quick. The arc pipeline. Starting with, of course, the game designer. They're responsible for setting up the gameplay, telling the story of the level, basically setting up the gameplay with literally building blocks, and I'll show you some of those. They're there to establish the camera volumes and designate the theme. There's a lot of exploratory concept art that happens here. Then we move that through to the environmental modeling. That's the stage where we soften the geometry, we sculpt it out, and as the environment modelers go in there, new opportunities arise for places to go or things to jump to or points of interest. Then adding some visual interest to the levels. Every level that we had what we referred to as the weenie. And those weenies were placed in the environment so that whenever you felt lost, you could look over to the left or the right and get a visual bearing. On the rooftop of Paris, there was obviously the Eiffel Tower and the water tower. I'll point it out when I get to that slide. And so that stuff is all kind of covered here, and that stuff I was talking about with the undulating pathways and enclosed shapes and areas is really handled in here, as well as trying to keep it all under performance. From there, it's handed off to the texture artists, and the texture artists, their job is to really take this geometry and just make it sing. A lot of tweaking happens here. Little plants are added in certain areas and pockets to just sort of give visual interest, and they work hand in hand with the lighting artist as well. A lot of flourish happens in this stage. Okay, and again, the texture art is pushing along the gameplay path to help sell the mood of what we're trying to do. Then the lighting, basically telling you where we want you to go next. Then it goes back to design because everything's broken. But through this whole stage, the programmers are sitting there basically cramming, giving us more polygons to use. Obviously, with gameplay, things need to be rigged. Certain events happen, animations need to happen on cue, etc. That's all happening simultaneously during that pipeline process. So here's a handoff that would come from the design stage. As you can see, it's just all rudimentary shapes, and this is actually one of the more finished ones. So as you can see, a lot of the gameplay mechanic type stuff is actually stuff that we had in the game already. It was just there to prototype gameplay. So there's that mattress, and there's another shelf you can see that's actually not supported at all. Its sole purpose there was to just see if it's fun. Does the gameplay work? So here's the water tower from the very first level of Paris. Those blue things are the antennas that you jump around. And this area here was a little playland area that, its sole purpose was to just hang out and just see Sly do silly things. Into the main elevator. And again, all of this stuff is taken care of in as far as camera volumes and where, how we want you to be seeing this stuff before it even goes to modeling. Like what I'm talking about with the down shot of all of this. So then it goes into our modeling stage. As you can see, a lot of the stuff is starting to get fleshed out. We have a phrase at Sucker Punch, which is, I'll probably end up on my tombstone, is no 90-degree angles. That's my big thing. No 90 degrees. Like, it sends me into a tizzy. And so as you can see, whenever possible, avoid 90-degree angles. Playing with the relationships of thick and thin. Playing with how shapes play off of each other. Proportions. Is really what happens all in this modeling stage. There you are. The tube became this wonky thing with no 90-degree angles. It doesn't exactly make the physics of the geometry work super smoothly, but it looks neat. So here's the elevator shaft. Again, as you can see, we had a forced perspective on this to where, in order for it to feel like you were going down a lot further than you really were, we actually took those brackets around the sides and we actually played with their heights so that it looked like it was a further way down than it really was. This is where we start adding a lot of the sense of proportion to this world. And then the texture and lighting. Again, this is using lights as a light source as a point of interest. The blue sparkles as well, as you can see. Coming in now with the more finished stuff. Again, I think I showed this using lighting as a point of interest. This was actually from slide 2. This is a shot of Paris. So this is basically what the game that's going to ship will look like. I brought this to basically show how our lighting system really affects the world. Like, this is basically it with the lighting not on at all. So the lighting is basically a 3-pass system that that gives us a shadow color. The pure texture color is what we refer to as the highlight, and then the in-between being the midtone, so that you get a sense of volume to all objects. Incorporating the story. So I think, as I'd mentioned, similar to movies, we like to think of each episode basically as a 3-act story, to where you're playing Act 2. By putting these bumpers that we had, which were the cutscenes, we would basically set up all of Act 1, you would play Act 2, and then we'd resolve it with Act 3. So throughout the game, we basically had these intros that sort of set up, give you an idea of where you were going, who the bosses were. And again, their main job was to set up the bosses, give you a sense of travel, and establish the mood for the level. Okay, and then so this is just a montage of the cutscenes. The big thing was to make look like they're essentially cartoons of a cartoon. Whereas we were taking a lot of shortcuts by embracing the cartoon aesthetic during gameplay, that allowed us to make a lot of shortcuts in terms of trying to sell personalities and goofy characters. This was an abstract of that even further. This was really to set you up to get to know who these bosses were, because one of the biggest things was you'd only see these bosses once in the whole level. So I figured by getting them out there first, you actually get a sense of who you're stealing from. That was also furthered with these PA announcements that you would hear over the loudspeaker, so that you'd feel like they're on to you, they know you're coming. That was something that we sort of thought would really help sell these characters. And of course, they were all downtrodden in their youth and turned to a life of crimes for revenge. The endings. Once completing the boss battle, they were there to provide the closure, explain the history of what you just found, give a sense of time passing by showing the gang hanging out. And I think I have yeah. So you just sort of get a sense that these guys really enjoy hanging around together. Let's see. And again, like I said, it reinforced the sense of time passing, which I think is okay. Pen and paper. I think, as I've mentioned, at all various stages, the more pencil and paper work that we could provide, we did. It was a lot of drawings, but I think, as I said, with going through the pipeline, doing the exploratory stuff first. Oh boy, this is 18 months before we shipped. As you can see here, there's a lot of rough stuff. Sony actually paid us for this. It had really no sense of place. It had no real interaction at all. Like, there was no sense of much except just shooting through a tube. So the first exploratory stuff really sort of kind of helped, but ultimately it really wasn't that helpful to gameplay. Hello? Oh. But coming through the developing the concept art to actually work with the in-game geometries where things started to really happen. And this is from the Raleigh exterior. This is just more of the Carmelita animation, more for shooting. So hopefully that makes sense when I say that. Is whenever possible, really getting a chance to push the boundaries of what you're doing. You know, it only takes one guy 25 minutes to come up with a drawing. When it affects such a big team, it's whenever possible to always push what you're doing. Facts, publisher, Sony. The number of developers, between 14 and 24. 3 years in development, 4 contractors, and we burned through 3 CD players, 2 coffee machines, and 1 office space. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer any. I guess I'm supposed to ask you to come up to the mic, and I guess we have to make sure we end this by 3:30. I guess they're recording this.
The mic, can I?
Yeah.
Is it working? Okay. I had a lot of questions, but my first one was, did you guys use Raccoon reference?
I'm sorry?
Did you use any live Raccoon footage when you were making the character?
No, it was all, I think, again, that was the real great thing of using the cartoon aesthetic, is that we actually got a chance to really play with exaggeration.
Yeah, and push it further.
Yeah. Cartoon physics.
In the concept art phase, I'm curious, how much work did you guys do for each level?
We got phone books.
Yeah?
They're like 1.5 inches thick.
So what was the process with dealing with the concept artist? Between you, the concept artist, and the modeler, what was the cycle?
Well, let's see. At the beginning, I would do a lot of the exploratory stuff. And then there's another concept artist that I worked with as well. And we basically just sit there and just go out there. No restrictions. It was something that the game designers could then just use to just sort of take and extract ideas or imagery from.
What did they get? Did they get a description of the level from the game designer, and that's it?
We just brainstormed and basically just through talking and what are some cool ideas about, this area or this area.
I see.
It was essentially all based off of the personality of the character. I
see.
should have gone into that a little bit more, but once we knew who these bosses were, we just sort of, like Raleigh, for instance, the frog from the first level, he was a tinkerer, so we really wanted to play up this. Originally, we went down this whole Alice in Wonderland kind of thing, where he was like just this total Cheshire cat, pipe smoking guy. But essentially, the more we got in there, the idea of him being this insane tinkerer came out, and so we would just provide them with just crazy environments and imagery that they would then basically make those building blocks that I showed you, and then that would go to the environment modeler, who would basically sit there and through any one of the levels, we wanted to make sure we had a big moment, and that refers to that squeezing through the tunnel into an open area. Those are pretty much referred to as big moments, right? The reveal. So we'd sit around, we'd take the screenshots of that, and that's literally what we draw from.
What you draw from?
Yeah, we'd actually draw a picture of that.
That's interesting. So you'd build a rough model and then use that to figure out the person to put the details on top.
And in that stage too, that's where you can really go in there and say, oh man, what if we actually went from these 3 spires to the main door? and put some windows and lighting opportunities here. So essentially, the concept art happens twice in the process.
So the boss was the one who decided what the level looked like?
Yes. Yeah. So it all, they live there, so.
Cool.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thanks.
I was wondering how the concept art has evolved for Sly Cooper 2.
I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to say about this.
Well, can you just like I know
there's more of it.
They like buffed up the characters and gave them different styles and.
Well, about Sly 2, we did age them a little bit. They did age by a couple of years. The environments are, you start in Paris, and then just like a James Bond movie, it starts small, and the deeper you get into the story, the more crazier things get, to where eventually you're like, fighting in a moon base or something. So there is definitely more crazy bosses and places to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Earlier on, you talked about early stages of the visual aspect of the levels with very rough geometry and stuff like that. I was wondering, did the game designer work directly in that stage to design the levels?
Oh yeah, they modeled
Or
them.
did they work on pen and paper first and then move to that stage?
No, they made those boxes that you saw. Like those guys are. I mean, literally, our desks are like 5 feet, we're all right there.
Right.
So there's a lot of back and forth and communication that way.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you.
I actually have two questions. One is related to the last question. Are your game designers, do they have art skills? Do they have 3D Studio Max or Maya or whatever tool you're using skills? Or do you have a palette of default objects and things that they could plot worlds with?
No, that's cool. The game designers actually came up through the art team. They started as environment modelers, and eventually just started interacting with the engine on their own, and they basically build all of that stuff in Maya. There's two designers, and they both work both work differently. It's really cool how they complement each other, because one is definitely build it in Maya, trial and error, and then the other one is really just like a coffee shop with a pencil and paper, writing down his ideas, and then he'll go back into the office and try this and basically start the trial and error process, and then go back to pencil and paper. So I don't know if that really answers your question per se, but I mean, essentially what does come out of them is the same thing. It's a rudimentary set of building blocks.
So before your environment modelers and mappers get that and start working on it, do you guys take those raw shapes and run them through your engine and play the game on it to see how well it plays?
Yep. That's
Okay.
usually why it goes back to the designers after it's all done, because stuff gets moved and broken.
Right. So my second question was, you talked a little bit about lighting and using color to lead the characters. Is that stuff that you wound up using like Vertex Lighting for, or did you just build it in to the maps so you had separate maps for the warm path areas, or
Yeah,
how'd
that
you do
basically,
that?
Vertex Lighting, and it's also, like I said, oh boy, I wish I had some other slideshows to show this, but I think when you saw that Paris exterior, that's with the lights on, and by putting on the world light, it pretty much blankets most of the world into like our shadow color, and then we'd sit there and we'd litter the levels with like breadcrumbs of lighting areas that we want you to go to.
With real lights?
Yes.
And then you just burn it all in?
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I was just curious, how much R&D time for the concept work before you actually started production?
Boy, that's a tough question. I mean, we were drawn a lot. There was a lot of, I think in the beginning, as we were exploring more and more of how we wanted the first level to really play out. That's where we did probably the most concept art, because I think we're still trying to find out what this game was that we're trying to make. So the short answer is it got shorter as time went on, but generally speaking, there's about a week to 2 weeks per level.
Okay.
So, that it?
Do you know off the top of your head how many units of Sly were shipped?
That shipped? I don't. I do know that I think we're pretty darn close to 1 million at this point.
And could you talk a little bit about what that meant to your studio to have one of the biggest sleeper hits on PlayStation?
Yeah. Well, I can just. I think for everybody, it really gave like a sense of payoff, because I mean, you guys know, I mean, what it takes when you're in crunch mode. It's really rewarding. Like, it's really more surreal than anything else, because it's just one of those things where you send it out the door and you're just surprised anybody even saw it. You know what I mean? Just because by the time it's out and on the shelf and it's out there and it's no longer in front of you, it happened like 4 or 5 years ago. You know what I mean? So to receive the attention that we did, I think we were just really lucky that, you know, we came out in a year that there were sequels. So that we were perceived as different. But I mean, I think, you know, having said that, I mean, I think people really see the company now as like, it isn't like 12 guys working in a garage anymore, which is how it kind of started.
It's Sucker Punch Studios, everyone knows. The cane, I saw that in the original drawings, but it's used quite a bit in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Was that always the intention in the beginning of the character development?
Yeah, like I said, in the early character development, it was just the sense of something to give him class. The idea was also using it as like a window cutter, or just more of a morphing tool. But obviously, as we needed more and more moves and stuff like that, the cane just was the perfect weapon of choice.
And where is the last clue on Miss Ruby's World?
I'm sorry?
The last clue in Miss Ruby's World? Just kidding. One more question. I don't know if you can speak to this. I saw you on TV talking about Sly Cooper 2. That was you, correct? I can't remember what program it was.
Uh-huh.
But can you talk a little bit about the freedom that Sly gets in Band of Thieves as opposed to in Thievius Raccoonus in terms of his environments?
Sure. I think after talking with people that played Sly 1, it was really people really wanted to run around Paris. You know, they saw this big expansive city. So I think that was really addressed in Sly 2. The free roaming environments, and pretty much like the rooftop from the very first level in Paris from Sly 1, it's literally that. It's an interactive jungle gym that you can go anywhere and do anything. So it's definitely bigger in many respects.
Is there lots of mini games in Sly 2?
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. So.
Does the free roaming affect how you're going to use your lighting in the sequel?
It actually, and this will be interesting for the post-mortem slide too, it's just that because there are so many ways, I don't know if you were recording this, should I just repeat the question? Yes? Okay. How the lighting is going to affect Sly 2 is that with Sly 1, we were in many ways guiding you through this one linear way through the world. Now the challenge is really, there are multi ways to get to where you need to get to. And so, again, we're using the lighting in terms of the big areas, the big moments of an open environment, as well as the sideshow stuff to sort of help point you. But yeah, it's become a real challenge that way. So, yeah.
Could you give us a rough timeline of how long it took for one end level to go through the art production cycle?
The end level or the beginning level?
End level.
Oh, the end level? Wow. Yeah, the question was how long it took for the end level to go through the production process. Towards the end, we were burning like, boy, I think it had to be like the clockwork level, I believe, went through the production process inside of 6 weeks. Like, we were moving that thing pretty quickly. And that was actually with a lot of people working on it, because it was that last level was pretty rig heavy. So there was a lot of people back and forth working on it. But generally speaking, yeah, we were working at the height of production at about 4 to 6 weeks per level. Go back, yeah. Well, that had a lot to do with the physics of slimes. Oh, I guess the question was free-form collision. At what point did we decide to change it? If you're referring to that Sly running around who...
Well, no, just more like, more like the problems of collision. Obviously, your style's got quite...
Lots of wanky, yeah. So the actual physics with that is we totally... It's not fun, so we just simplified the physics and went with that. I don't know, does that answer your question?
It's more the fact that the designers were obviously positioning things how they want in the gameplay, so it worked really nicely. And then obviously the art, who's responsible then to make sure that the player can't go through all the things through.
Right, yeah.
How do you control that?
That was part of the reason why we send it back to the designers to take care of that. Like, so we're a lot more attentive of it now than before, but it's so yeah.
You mentioned that you did textures, but the painting and the scanning didn't work, and the sculpting didn't work. So what did you end up doing for textures?
Oh, how we ended up making the textures, basically all just Photoshop Painter. I think once we started finding how we wanted it to feel stylized, it was easy to move in that direction. Our lead texture artist is just amazingly talented. So, is that, yeah?
I'm curious, in what order did you develop the level, like in the entire life cycle of the product? Did you start with the first level and work later, did you start to build the game with them?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. The question was, well, correct me if I misinterpreted your question, but how how we produced the levels that were in the game. Did we produce the levels in order of the game that you played? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Originally, the level that you ended up playing as the first level was originally intended to be the fourth level. The idea being, the further in we got, the easier or the more technology we would have had to make a more impactful level. It just as we got towards the end there, it was really about the designers were really hitting their stride as they were making these levels. So to go back and retrofit a level that had been made with not all the moves in place yet, to retrofit that was just next to impossible. Because we only had certain jump distances at the time. We didn't have certain moves that you had gained after the fact. In terms of the order for the worlds, they were pretty much built literally like as you played them. It was like the approach as you're going to the hideout, then the actual hub of the hideout, and then the levels that came out after that. That's per world. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool. So, anything else? Oh, yeah.
Did you feel you had enough time to do this game, and how often were you in crunch time?
The question was, did we feel we had enough time to do the game, and how long were we in crunch time? Well, I thought that, I thought Sony was so patient with us. They were really, really patient with us. So, in that sense, we were really lucky that they let us continue, and really find our way. Like, you saw what we kind of had 18 months before we shipped. As far as crunch time, we were in, boy, let me think back to that. I'd have to say, I was in crunch time for at least 12 months. But it was obviously broken up intermittently with, pockets. But
Like how many hours a day is crunch time
oh boy, back then that was probably 14, 16 hours a day. And then, definitely there was the all-nighters.
It paid off.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was. I think seeing it and actually, like I said, addressing your question about how it, seeing those numbers. So yeah, getting that was really rewarding. So yeah.
How many animators did you have before recording, and what were you using as your primary package?
I'm sorry, I heard that. Yeah. How many animators? How many animators on the project, and what package we were using? Okay. We had 2 animators, and they were working in Maya. And I think the number of animations for those guys were somewhere at like 30 animations per NPC. and Sly had something like 200 some animations. So, all right. Well, I guess that's it. Well, thanks a lot for coming. I really appreciate it. And if I could get you to fill out the forms that I guess you were given, and hand it to one of our esteemed